بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء وخاتم المرسلين سيدنا ونبينا بالقاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين واللعنة الدائمة الباقية على أعدائهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد, brothers and sisters in Imam, Salamun Alaikum. We will inshallah start with a very brief quiz just to refresh our memory before we continue. Can we get the quiz questions on the... थोड़ा और दे दे उधर, थोड़ा और इधर दे दे. Okay, just about 2-3 minutes. Okay, it's very simple. Do we have the questions on the screen? Not yet? Okay, let us look at what are the answers you got. Number 1, Barzakh means, how many of you got C? Engagement period. It's like a Barzakh, isn't it? The correct answer would be B, barrier, of course. 2, Masumin alayhim salam are closer to you. According to the hadith, it's B, Day of Judgment. Barzakh only happens to the unbelievers. This is false. And number 4 is based on the ayat we discussed last week. Ma'ishatun zanqa, restrained life, refers to life in Barzakh, whereas blindness refers to the situation in Akhirat. Number 5, it's very obvious, the answer would be 6 is not true. Number 7, after the question answer in the grave, the soul is attached to a mithali. A mithali is a non-physical body, C. And number 8, we looked at that ayat, very interesting one in Quran, where Allah takes this soul but does not end its connection to the body. And this is the time of sleep. Okay. So let us just very briefly summarize where we have reached. I was thinking we'll only deal with 3 or 4 weeks, but it seems this is going on longer, so we might take a little bit few more, weeks. Barzakh basically is the time between death and resurrection. Number 2, some people will be rewarded and some will be tormented in the Barzakh. Number 3, we discussed many verses of Quran where Allah talks about the bliss or punishment soon after death, and all those ayat refers to the time in Barzakh and not the hereafter. The example of Al Fir'aun, that they were drowned and then they were put in the fire. The fire of Jahannam is still far away. The example of Shuhada, the example of this fellow in Surah Yasin, who says after he was killed, that wish my people would know what Allah has given to me. That is in Barzakh. Then we discussed last week that the soul doesn't die with the death of the body. And it is attached to a mithali body during the time of Barzakh. But on the day of Qiyamah, our physical body will be resurrected and the soul would be put into it. Tonight I would like to talk about this issue of, the situation of death itself and how the mu'mineen go through it, and especially the issue of presence of the Prophet and Imam Ali at the time of death. We hear about it quite a lot, but this is more a detailed and authentic way of looking at it. And the question I put is that, does a mu'min fear the process of death? It all depends. Nobody can deny that, yes, people are afraid of death. But for a mu'min or a mu'mina, what will happen at that time will basically change the fear into something where that mu'min or mu'mina will no more fear that process. And as I said earlier in the very first lecture, that when we talk about Barzakh, this is beyond the realm of our aql. We have to go to the Quran and the Hadith. And this is where that's what we are doing. A Hadith that we have from our 6th Imam by a person by the name of Sadir al-Sayrafi. And he asked the Imam, where he says, Ju'iltu fidak, may my life be sacrificed for you, Yabna Rasulullah. Hal yukrahu al-mu'min ala qabz ruhi. When the soul of a mu'min is taken from the body, does he dislike it? Does he, fear that? And Imam says, La wallahi. إنه إذا أتاه ملك الموت لقبض روحي جزي عند ذلك. Imam says, no, by Allah, a mu'min doesn't go through that ikrah and dislike. Why? Imam says that when Malakul Maut comes, and this is where we are told that although we don't have the ability to see the angels now, but at the time of death, we will be able to see Malakul Maut. And Imam says that when the Malakul Maut comes, initially we will be afraid. But then the Malakul Maut himself will say, فَيَقُولُ لَهُ مَلَكُ الْمَوْتِ يَا وَلِيَ اللَّهِ. Because that fellow is a believer, a mu'min or a mu'mina, the Malakul Maut will say to that person, لا تجزع فوالذي بعث محمدا صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم. He would say to the person, don't be distressed, because I swear by Allah who sent Muhammad, لأن أبر بك وأشفق عليك من والد رحيم لو حضرك. Malak al-Maut says to the believer that do not be afraid, because I am more kinder and generous to you than your merciful father if he was here now. So don't be afraid. And then he says, افتح عينيك فانظر. Open your eyes and see what is around you. And Imam says, وَيُمَثَّلُ لَهُ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ وَأَمِيرُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَفَاطِمَةَ وَالْحَسَنُ وَالْحُسَيْنُ وَالْأَئِمَّةُ مِنْ ذُرِّيَّتِهِمْ. When Malak al-Maut says to the believer, open your eyes and see, he will look around and he will see tamassala, he will see that somebody has come, Rasul is there, Ali is there, Fatima is there, Hassan and Hussein are there, and the Imams would be there. فَيُقَالُ لَهُ. Then Malak al-Maut will say to him, هَذَا رَسُولُ اللَّهِ. This is Rasulullah, this is Amir al-Mu'mineen, this is Fatima, this is Hassan, this is Hussein. قَالَ فَيَفْتَحُ عَيْنُهُ فَيَنْظُرُ. At that time he will open his eyes and he will see. And when he will see, فَيُنَادِي رُوحَهُ مُنَادٍ مِنْ قِبَلِ رَبِّ الْعِزَّةِ. At that time, somebody will call that believer. And the call would be that, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I would like to take your soul. And the words would be, يا أيها النفس المطمئنة إلى محمد وآل بيته ارجعي إلى ربك راضية بالولاية مرضية بالثواب فادخلي في عبادي يعني محمدا وأهل بيته وادخلي جنتي. That call will be the time when the soul is being taken out, and he will be told that, oh, the soul who is now in this state of tranquility and peace, mutma'inna. This itmi'nan comes from where? Al-mutma'inna ila Muhammad wa ahl baytihi. Itmi'nan is based on Muhammad and his Ahlul Bayt. Irja'i ila rabbika radiyatan. Now you return back to your Lord. Raziyatan, while you are pleased bil wilaya, with the wilayat of Ali. Mardiyatan bil thawab, and you will be pleased in return with the thawab from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Fadkhuli fi ibadi. Now enter among my chosen servants, referring to Muhammad and Ahl Bayt Muhammad. Wadkhuli jannati, and enter in my garden. It's interesting that Imam has used these words from the last 3 ayat of Surah Fajr. And if you see, this is one example which we had not discussed on the first day, that even this ayat, يَا أَيُّهَا النَّفْسُ الْمُطْمَئِنَّةُ ارْجِعِي إِلَىٰ رَبِّكَ رَاضِيَةً مَرْضِيَّةً فَادْخُلِي فِي عِبَادِي وَادْخُلِي جَنَّتِي. This is about Barzakh. It's not about Qiyamah. And Jannat here is the Jannat in Barzakh. And that's one example of how some of the ayat basically are referring to the Alam Barzakh, the state of a mu'min or a mu'mina at the time of Barzakh. Salawat Pranik Barara. Inshallah will be among those that Imam talks about. Now this issue that the Panjatan would be there at the time of death, this is considered to be unanimous belief of the Shia Isnaisharis. It's nothing, controversial about it. You can go to the early days after Ghaibat Kubra. People like Sheikh Mufid says this is part of our belief system. So there is no issue about it. Of course, there is a lot of discussion about what kind of a body would they have, because maybe thousands of mu'mineen are dying at the same time. How would be there? It's not our concern. That's not our job, and it's not our problem. How they will do it is their thing. We have to have that belief in the concept of the presence of the Panjatan at the time of death, and especially in the grave. Now this will happen not only for the mu'minin and the mu'minat. This is going to happen, especially the presence of Ali would be there for everyone. And it's interesting. I'll give you one narration of the opposite kind. We looked at the example of a mu'min or a mu'mina that the Imam referred to. Another is a narration that we have from the Imam again, where we look at this ayat known as the ayat of Bushra. Let me just... we don't have the hadith in the PowerPoints, but let me just narrate to you. This is the example of somebody where the Imam says that the Malakul Maut will ask this person, do you have the security to go through this peacefully? And the person who is dying or dead will ask, what security are you talking about? Ma dhalik. The answer would be, if it's a mu'min, it's wilayatu Ali bin Abi Talib. And if he's not a mu'min, he wouldn't know. And so the presence of the Imam is also comes on both sides. And we'll look at one more example. But here, let me relate this issue with another ayat of Quran from Surah Yunus. Surah Yunus is Surah number 10. And the ayat 62 to 64 are very interesting. In this ayat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَلَا إِنَّ أَوْلِيَاءَ اللَّهِ لَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. Verily the friends of Allah, those who are the believers, لَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. They shall have no fear, nor will they grieve. الذين آمنوا. Who are these awliya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? الذين آمنوا وكانوا يتقون. Number one, they had iman. Number two, they had taqwa. They were good belief as well as good deeds. لهم البشرى في الحياة الدنيا وفي الآخرة لا تبديل لكلمات الله ذلك هو الفوز العظيم. For them is good news in the life, in this life, as well as in the hereafter. And the words of Allah don't change. This is His promise. Now the question is, what good news is Allah talking about? لَهُمُ الْبُشْرَى فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا. Those who have good, sound belief and do good deeds, iman and taqwa, Allah says they will have bushra, good news, in hayat dunya, in this life, in this world. And of course in akhirah also. If we look at this, we have a hadith from our sixth Imam where he actually relates this whole issue of the presence of Ali to this ayat. And this is a hadith from Aban bin Usman, from Uqba, who heard from the sixth Imam, where he says, إن الرجل إذا وقعت نفسه في صدره يرى. Imam probably, by looking at some of the people in the audience, sometimes uses code words. And Imam says that when a person, when his soul is coming out, reaches to the throat area, yara, he will see. And so Uqba says, جعلت فداك وما يرى. What does he see? And Imam says, يرى رسول الله فيقول له رسول الله أنا رسول الله أبشر. He will see Rasulullah, and Rasul will say to him, I am the messenger of Allah and I give you good news. ثم يرى علي بن أبي طالب. Then he will see Ali bin Abi Talib فيقول. And Ali will say, Ana Ali ibn Abi Talib, alladhi kunta tuhibbuhu. I am the one whom you loved. Tuhibbu an anfa'akul yawm. Do you want me to help you and, bless you today? And أَيَكُونُ أَحَدٌ مِّنَ النَّاسِ يَرَى هَذَا ثُمَّ يَرْجَعَ إِلَى الدُّنْيَا. This is where the issue of whether mu'min or mu'mina will fear death or not. At that time, he will be told that, do you want to go back? Or you want to proceed further? And Imam says, لا إذا رأى هذا أبدا مات وعظم ذلك. After that, he will have no desire to go back. He will want to, or she would want to move forward. And that is where this distress or fear of the process of death will be overcome. And then the Imam basically relates this, and Imam says, this is there in the Quran, الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَكَانُوا يَتَّقُونَ لَهُمُ الْبُشْرَ فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا. That this basharat, this good news that Allah is talking about in this Surah Yunus, is actually when they see Rasul and Ali alayhimu salatu wassalam. Salawat alayhi. There is another narration of a similar kind under the same tafsir, the same ayat in tafsir of Ayyashi, confirming that the bushra here, the good news, is the visitation by the Prophet and the Imam to a mu'min or a mu'mina at the time of death. Now let us look at some real examples, and I have avoided all the stories we hear about the people. I've only selected one or two examples from the days of the Imams themselves, where the living Imams confirm those events. Otherwise, if you want to look at the stories of the ordinary, mu'minin and mu'minat, ulama, pious people, there are many, many about it. But we'll only look at those that we have the confirmation from the Imam about those events. One is the story of Zakaria bin Sabur. According to some of the historians, it's actually Shahpur, but in Arabic it becomes Sabur. So maybe he was of an Iranian origin. And he was amongst the mu'mineen and a good doer. And one of his companions says that I was there when he was dying. And I saw at the time of death, he opened his hand. And as if he was talking to somebody, and he says, Ibyazzat yadayya ya Ali. O Ali, my hands have become, in a way, radiant. Not white in a color sense. Ibyazzat yadayya ya Ali. He was responding to Ali. Of course, those people who were sitting there wouldn't see him, but the person who is dying was able to see that. Now, according to the narrator, Syed bin Yasar, he says, after this death of this person and his funeral, Muhammad bin Muslim, his companion, also was there. He says, I went to Imam Ja'far Sadiq alayhi salam. And Muhammad bin Muslim was there. So he says, I assume that he must have mentioned that to the Imam. And so I was waiting to hear the comments of Imam about this person, where he addresses Ali in his last moment of life. But Imam didn't say anything, and he thought maybe Muhammad bin Muslim probably didn't mention, and he himself wasn't up to it to mention that. Not everybody can really speak in every place. So he says, I was just thinking about it, that why didn't Muhammad bin Muslim not mention anything to the Imam? And I was leaving the gathering. He says, all of a sudden, the Imam sent a messenger asking me to go back to him. He says, I went to the Imam, and Imam himself asked him, أخبرني عن هذا الرجل الذي حضرته عند الموت أي شيء سمعته يقول. Imam now asked Syed bin Yasar, tell me about this person whose death you witnessed. What did he say and what did you hear? He says, Basata yadahu. He opened his hands and he says, Abyazzat yadayya ya Ali. As if he's talking to Ali and he says, my hands have become clear. فقال Abu Abdullah, our sixth Imam, 3 times he says, Wallahi ra'ahu, Wallahi ra'ahu, Wallahi ra'ahu. He says, I swear by Allah that he saw Ali. He saw Ali, he saw Ali. So our sixth Imam is confirming this incident about Zakaria bin Sabur, talking to the Imam during the last moments of his life. The opposite of that, there was a Khariji, and Ibn Abi Ya'fur, one of the companions of the Imam, a famous one. Of course, those days you have all kinds of people in your circle of friends and relatives. And there was a person by the name of Khattab al-Juhni. And he was very much a Khariji type, enemy of Ahlul Bayt. And he says, I was there. دخلت عليه ععوده للخلط والتقية. I went to him to visit him to do ayadat because of our, relationship and because of taqiyya. While he was at this last stages of life, dying, سمعته يقول. I saw him saying to someone, we couldn't see that person, and he was saying to that person, ما لي ولك يا علي. What have I to do with you, Ya Ali? So it means that Ali comes everywhere. For a mu'min, he is the cause for bliss and peace. For a munafiq and an enemy, he is a cause of distress. And this person reacts by saying, Ma li wa laka ya Ali. What have I to do with you, O Ali, that you have come here? Again, he says, I went to the Imam, mentioned this story about this enemy of Ali. And when I said that, Imam basically said, Ra'ahu wa Rabbil Ka'aba. That yes, he definitely saw Ali, and I swear by the Lord of the Kaaba. And so this issue, this is not only something we hear, in the majalis or the khitabat. Yes, this is part of our unanimous belief of Shia Isna Ashari, that the Panjatan come at the time of the death of the mu'mineen and the mu'minat. One more narration. And this is quoted by Sheikh Mufid in his Amali. Amali basically is a collection of ahadith of different themes. It's more like gatherings that they used to have, and he would narrate ahadith of different topics which will be compiled together. And this compilation was done by his student, Syed Murtaza. And it's interesting where he talks about the conversation of Haris Hamdani. Hamdan is from Yemen. It's a tribe who were very supportive of Amir al-Mu'mineen in his lifetime. And Haris was one of the prominent members of the tribe. He was a close companion of Amir al-Mu'mineen. And this is a conversation between Ali and Haris Hamdan at the time between Zarbat and Shahadat of Ali. And he says, when he came inside, during that day in between the Zarbat and Shahadat, and Imam asked him, how come you look distressed? And he says, what can I do? I was outside sitting with people, and there was discussion about you and the other khulafa, and they were all for and against and this and that. There was a lot of confusion. And Amir al-Mu'mineen, gives him a narration of, he says, the problem is, People look at personalities and then they try to find out what is haqq and what is batil. You have to find out what is haqq and what is batil, and then measure people according to that, and not the other way around. And then he says, I am the abd of Allah, I am the brother of the Prophet, I am the wasi, and he goes on. At the end he says something to Haris, which is relevant to this long conversation, where he says, وَأُبَشِّرُكَ يَا حَارِث لِتَعْرِفُنِي. That, oh Haris, I give you good news. You will see me in 4 places. So this is Ali, narrated by Mufid, talking to Haris Hamdani, and the narrator is Asbagh bin Nubata, another very prominent companion of Ali, who was there, and he's the one who narrated this. He says, 4 places you will see me. Inda al-mamat, at the time of death you will see me. In the Sirat, on the day of judgment, when you have to cross the Sirat, you will see me. In the house, when you come to the house of Kawthar, you will see me. وَعِنْدَ الْمُقَاسَمَةِ, and you will see me at the time of Muqasama. And so Haris Hamdani basically says, I understood the 3 points. In the mamat, in the Sirat, in the house. What is this Muqasama? And Imam said, Muqasama, Muqasamatun nar, dividing people between Jannat and Jahannam. Uqasimuha, I will be the one who will do the division there. And I'll say to the Jahannam, Hadha waliyi fatrikihi, he is my friend, so leave him alone. And when the other will come, he will say, Ali says, I will say, Hadha aduwi fakhudihi, this is my enemy, therefore hold on to him. And so this is where Ali says, I will be at the time of Muqasama. And it's not really surprising to accept that concept. I think it was Imam Shafi, I'm not sure about the name, but just trying to remember this event, where he was asked about this claim of Ali, about being Qasimun Nari wal Jannah, that he is going to divide people into Jannat and Jahannam. And so either Ahmad ibn Hanbal or Imam Shafi, and they say, what is the problem in believing in that? He says, haven't you heard from the Prophet saying that, Ya Ali, la yubghiduka mu'min wa la yuhibbuka munafiq. Haven't you heard the Prophet saying that, oh Ali, only a mu'min will love you and only a munafiq will hate you. And then he says, where will the mu'min go and where will the munafiq go? And they said, well, mu'min will go to Jannat, munafiq will go to Jahannam. So Imam Shafi says, well, that's what it means when we say Ali is Qasimun Nari wal Jannah. During the days of the 6th Imam, this conversation of Amir al-Mu'mineen with Haris Hamdan had become so popular that a person by the name of Syed Hamyari, he was not a Syed, this is his title only, who was a follower of another Shia sect, not Isna Ashari. It was during the time of the 6th Imam that he came to the right path and believed in him. And during his time, it seems that this story and then this conversation between Haris Hamdan and Amir al-Mu'mineen had become so popular that Syed Hamyari, who was a poet in his own right, basically put this whole conversation into poetry. Let me very quickly go through it, where he says, قَوْلُ عَلِيٍّ لِحَارِثِ عَجَبٌ, that the statement of Ali to Haris is really amazing. كَمْ ثَمَّ عَعُوجَبَ لَهُ حَمَلًا, and there are many other amazing statements from Ali. Ya Hari Hamdan, man yamut yarani. O Haris, instead of saying the full name, he just uses one part of it because of some of the measure of poetry there. that, O Haris Hamdan, man yamut yarani, whoever dies will see me. Min mu'minin aw munafiqin qabala. Doesn't matter whether that the person who is dying is a mu'min or a munafiq, they will see me. يعرفني طرفه وعارفه. They will recognize me and know me. And I will know him. بنعته واسمه وما عمل. I will know his name, I will know his background, and I will know what he has done. وأنت عند الصراط تعرفني. And O Haris, at the time of Sirat, you will see me and you will know me. فلا تخف عثرة ولا ضللا. So you should have no fear, and there will be no, sleeping on that Sirat. أسقيك من بارد على ضمع. After your trust on the day of Qiyamah, I will feed you from the Hawz Kawthar. تخاله في الحلاوة على عسل. The drink that I will give to you, you will feel like it is the cold honey drink. أقول للنار هنا توقف للعرض دعيه ولا تقرب الرجل. And when the fire will come close to you, I will say to the fire, stop, don't go near him, leave him alone. دعيه لا تقربيه إن له. Leave him alone, do not go close to him. له حبلا بحبل الوصي المتصلة. Because he is connected with the rope of the successor of the Prophet in a continuous manner. Salawat pranay para. And this is during the days of the Imam. This poetry is becoming popular to the extent that it reaches to us through Sheikh Mufid. What is interesting here is that Syed Himyari himself is one of the examples who saw Ali, and his sighting of Ali before he died is recorded. And this happened, now there are narrations about him that maybe he had one weakness in his amal. He came from a mixed family. Some of the relatives were Shias of Ali, and some were, on the opposition side. Some were even like Khawarij. And when he died, when he was dying, at the last, moments, his face, he was a very, wide and handsome person. All of a sudden, a small dark, point started on his face and expanded, gradually covering the whole face. It became dark. Those relatives who are against Ali, they became happy. They said, see, he follows Ali and this is what happens to him. And at that time, those who were there, from the followers of Ali and among his relatives, they basically heard Sayyid Himyari saying, Ali? Yes, Ali is already there now. Oh Ali, is this what happens to those who love you? As soon as he said that, they saw that gradually, his face becomes bright like before. And the last words of poetry that he composed before he dies was about that, what happened to him. And look at the words that he has. And this is his last poetry while he's dying, where he says, أحب الذي من مات من أهل وده تلقاه بالبشرى لدي الموت يضحك. I love the one that when those who love him, when they die, he meets them with good news at the time of death while he is smiling. ومن مات يحوى غيره من عدوه فليس له إلا إلى النار مسلك. But those who are from his enemies, when they die, then they don't have any path to go but to the Jahannam. أبا حسن نفديك نفسي وأسرتي ومالي وما أصبحت في العرض أملك. O Abu al-Hasan, I sacrifice my life, my family, and whatever I possess in this dunya to you. Aba Hassan inni bifadlika arifun. O Ali, I recognize your virtues and your excellence. Wa inni bihabli man hawaka limumsikun. And I hold on to the rope of those who are among those who love you. وَأَنْتَ وَصِيُّ الْمُصْطَفَى وَابْنَ عَمِّهِ. You are the successor of the Prophet and you are his cousin. وَإِنَّ نُعَادِي مُبْغِضِيكَ وَنَتْرُكُ. And we are opposed to those who hate you and those who abandon you. مَوَالِيكَ نَاجٍ مُؤْمِنٍ بَيِّنُ الْهُدَى. Those who follow you are the successful believers, bayyinul huda, and they are on the very clear guidance. وَقَالِيكَ مَعْرُوفُ الضَّلَالَةِ مُشْرِكٌ. But those who are opposed to you, they are known to be on the wrong path, the path of shirk. وَلَاحَ لَحَانِي فِي عَلِيٍّ وَحِزْبِهِ فَقُلْتُ لَحَاكَ اللَّهُ إِنَّكَ أَغْفَكُ. One of those enemies basically condemned me because I love Ali and I'm part of the group of Ali. And I say to him now, referring to those who are laughing on him, he says, may Allah disgrace you, ya aghfaq, which means ya ahmaq. This is how he's using the term for those who basically were happy when his face became dark. And after reciting these lines, Syed Himyari ended with the words, أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله حقا حقا وأشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حقا حقا وأشهد أن عليا أمير المؤمنين حقا حقا. And he was repeating La ilaha illallah, and that's when his death occurred. And so this is again one example of something which happened during the days of our Imams. Salawat. Now this is just the issue of what happens at the time of death. We still have to discuss the issue of Hisab and Kitab in the grave. Inshallah, we'll do that next week. But let me spend a few minutes as a conclusion talking about the variety of groups in Barzakh. Let's know that clearly, and then we'll go into details, what will happen, what to whom. And that we will discuss inshallah next week. Basically there are three groups, although we will end up with four, and that's why I have added the title, 4 groups in Barzakh. The first is a group of those who are true believers or perfect believers. According to the words of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salatu was-salam, when he talks about Hisab and Kitab, the questioning after the death in grave, he says it will not happen to everyone. It will happen to only 2 groups. Man mahaz al-imana mahza. One of that would be the group which is on the perfect level of iman. And basically the way it's defined, those who are good, sound in their belief as well as in their deeds. Of course, we are not talking about ma'sumin here, and what we don't expect everybody to be infallible. But what happens is that they might have committed sins, but the sins were such that the musibat of this dunya, the tests and trials, the difficulties, the calamities of this dunya, or the agony of death was a sufficient kafara for their sins. So as soon as they go through this suffering of the dunya or the suffering at the time of death, they are already clean. And so they are in a way pure mu'mineen. And to them what happens? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows they deserve the Jannah. But Jannah is only after the day of Qiyamah. So what will happen to them? And this is where they have to go through the issue of the questions and answers by the malaika. And when they give the right answer, and if they are true believers, of course they will give right answers, then their soul will go through the state of ni'mat and bliss and peace for the entire time of Barzakh, till the day of Qiyamah. This will be for them like a preview of what they are going to get in the Jannat in the future. The second is the opposite of that. The perfect non-believers and the hypocrites. Imam uses the word mahaz al-kufra, mahza. And these are those who didn't have Iman. And even if they had any good deeds, let's assume they did it for, sincere purpose. Even if they had any good deeds, they would already have been rewarded in this dunya. Just like the example of the sins washed for the mu'mineen in the dunya, this is the opposite of that. And so when they come on the day of Qiyam, after death, when they come into Barzakh, they deserve Jahannam. But Qiyamah has not yet come. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make them go through the process of question and answers in the grave. And of course, being non-believers, they will give wrong answers. And that's where their soul will be put in the state of torment and azab for the entire period of Barzakh. This will be like a preview for them of Jahannam. Then we have a third group of those who are known as mustada'afin in the Quran, and those who are similar to it. What does this mean? All those who are not in group 1 and 2. Of course, we still have the fourth group, we'll keep it on the side. Those who are mentally incapable, for example, children and others, or those who were deprived of the true message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because of their location or their socio-political environment. Islam never reached to them. Think of the days of Soviet Union in Siberia. Somebody is born there, dies there, never heard about Islam. What happens to them? Even those, will be included in this group who, in a way, appreciated Ahlul Bayt. They had kind of love for the Ahlul Bayt, but they did not believe in them as the Imams. They didn't have bughz towards the Ahlul Bayt. Even those would be included in the list of mustada'afin. What will happen to them? There will be no questioning for them. There will be no fishar qabr and squeezing of the grave. And they will be put to sleep for the entire period of Barzakh. And it is upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of Qiyamah to forgive them or to punish them. It is left upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His discretion. Let us look at an ayat which talks about this concept of mustada'afin. It's a long ayat, but إِنَّ الَّذِينَ تَوَفَّاهُمُ الْمَلَائِكَ ظَالِمِ أَنفُسِهِمْ قَالُوا فِيمَا كُنْتُمْ. Again, this is actually an ayat. Even me, some of these ayat I didn't realize until I started studying this, that some of the ayat are more, relevant to Barzakh than the Akhirah. This is an example of the people where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says when the malaika will take their soul, when wafat will happen to them. And these are the people who are zalimi anfusihim. They have been unjust to themselves by committing sins. And because of their situation in Barzakh, that they are not going into the ni'mat, they will be punished. قَالُوا فِيمَا كُنْتُمْ. Malaika will ask them, what was your situation that you end up in this azab in Barzakh? قَالُوا كُنَّا مُسْتَضْعَفِينَ فِي الْعَرْضِ. They will say, what can we do? We were za'if, we were mustad'af, we were weak. What we call social peer pressure? This is one example. Oh, everybody else did it, so I did it. And this is where we see, قَالُوا. The environment was not good enough for us to practice Islam. The malaika will say, أَلَمْ تَكُنْ أَرْضُ اللَّهِ وَاسِعَةً فَتُهَاجِرُ فِيهَا. Was not the the earth of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wide enough for you to migrate to some other place? فَأُولَٰئِكَ مَأْوَاؤُهُمْ جَهَنَّمْ. These people, their end will be Jahannam. وَالسَّاعَةُ مَصِيرًا. And that route towards Jahannam is a very evil route for them. But then, the next ayah says, not all of them will be punished. There will be some people who were true mustadafin. إِلَّا الْمُسْتَضَعَفِينَ مِنَ الرِّجَالِ وَالنِّسَاءِ وَالْوِلْدَانِ. Except those who were weak, made weak from the men and the women and the children. لَا يَسْتَطِعُونَ حِيلَةً. Who didn't have any way to get out of their situation. Then didn't have access to message, could not take themselves out of it because of socio-political situation. وَلَا يَهْتَدُونَ سَبِيلًا. They didn't even have the hidayat. They didn't get the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَأُولَٰئِكَ. For them Allah says, عَسَى اللَّهُ أَنْ يَعْفُوا عَنْهُمْ. Allah may forgive them. وَكَانَ اللَّهُ عَفُوًّا غَفُورًا. He is very pardoning and very merciful. And so this is where we see that there is a category, third category, besides perfect mu'min, perfect kafir and munafiq, you have mustad'afin. And for them there is barzakh, but not in an active form. They will be put to sleep. There was a question asked on the first lecture that we had, that there is an ayat where Allah is asking some people, how long did you stay in the barzakh? And they will say, maybe one day. That refers to this mustad'afin. Because the mu'mineen would be there, aware of what's going on. The munafiqeen and the kafir of that level would also be punished. They would know how long is the barzakh for them. But this third group, they will be in suspension. Allah will leave their judgment for the day of Qiyamah. Either He will forgive them or punish them. And therefore, when they will be raised on the day of Qiyamah, they will say, probably, barzakh for us was just one day. There is another ayat about this third category, and this is an ayat from Surah Tawbah. وَآخَرُونَ مَرْجُونَ لِأَمْرِ اللَّهِ. And there are others. They are left to the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. إِمَّا يُعَذِّبُهُمْ وَإِمَّا يَتُوبُ عَلَيْهِمْ. Either He will punish them or He will forgive them. وَاللَّهُ عَلِيمٌ حَكِيمٌ. He knows better and He is the wise. The fourth group, the sinful believers. Their iman is perfect. There's no deficiency in iman. Like the first group, their iman is okay, but they have sins. Sins more than the first group. To the extent that the worldly musibat and suffering and the agony of death was not sufficient enough to wash away their sins. What happens to that group? There are two situations. Either Allah may decide that, okay, this mu'min, let us be merciful to him. By punishing him in the barzakh, so in akhirat he is clean. And I'm using that as a mercy. Remember the hadith of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam? This is where it refers to. That on the day of Qiyamah we'll be there. But I'm more concerned of you about the time of Barzakh. And this is the category that he's referring to. Or Allah might decide that, okay, he is a mu'min and he has committed the sins which has not been cleansed. And I don't want to punish him now, so he will be then put into the third group. His situation will be suspended, until the day of Qiyamah. Hopefully Muhammad and Ali Muhammad will be there to do the shafa'at. And so this is how we see that basically there will be 4 categories of people in the time of Barzakh. We just have about 10 minutes. Any questions for tonight? Yes. The question is that the mu'mineen who lived before Islam, whether it's time of Musa or Isa, what kind of questions would be asked. And when we talk about Amir al-Mu'minin coming at the time of death, whether this applied to pre-Islamic era, I haven't seen any hadith which says that. So I cannot just make up things, about it. The questioning, yes, the questioning would be according to their own time. Man Rabbuk, we know. Man Rasuluk, whether it's Musa or Isa, for example. Who is the Imam who came after them? So those would be the questions that they will be asked according to their own time. And a person who believed in the message of Allah which was revealed by that prophet at that time, he is a mu'min the same way that we define a mu'min during the time of Islam. Whether the Imam came to see them also, as I said, I haven't seen any hadith on this theme about people before Islam. There's a question over there? Yes. The question is that the non-believers who will be punished in Barzakh, would they get any discount? The discount can't be in a positive type. There is actually a narration that we have from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam where he talks about, I think, two individuals. One is one of the kings of Iran before Islam, who was known for his justice, and another was, I think it's Hatim, who was known for his generosity. The statements there are that the level of azab will be less for them. So, it's up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that yes, they might get discount of that kind. But Jannat, no. Jannat, is for the mu'mineen. Yes. We'll talk more about it. There are some very interesting hadiths on this issue, especially when we look at the context of the mustadhafeen. There are many groups within it. Especially, I refer to those who love the Ahlul Bayt, or they do not believe in them the way we believe, because of their ignorance or whatever their circumstances were. We can't just pass a judgment about them in that way. The discussion we had last week about misali body actually would help us to understand this phenomenon of the Prophet or the Imam coming at the death of thousands of people at the same time. That makes it easy for us to comprehend and digest this concept that they can be at more than one place at the same time. And the way would be to understand that from the perspective of badane misali. Although I would go back to the words of Allama Majlisi. He has a very wise statement about these ahadith. At the end he says, there is no requirement for us to go into details and to know exactly what kind of body they had and how they did. That's not our concern. The main thing is to believe that, they come. They come at the time of the death and at the time of the questioning in the grave. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, forgive our sins and give us the tawfiq to be among those who will be blessed by Him soon after death and not among the other categories. بحق محمد وآل محمد صلوات الله عليهم أجمعين.